Margaret is back. Take two. So I had Margaret on my podcast. I'm going to say probably about a year and a half ago.
At
Margaret
least.
and yes, Margaret and I had met during COVID through a friend of a friend, and we became fast friends. So that was great. I was intrigued by your offer because your offer targets women who are in midlife that are looking to make a move. And that just was exactly where I was at. So, Margaret, welcome to This is 50 Freedom Through Passions. I'm excited to get an update on where you're at with your business. I definitely know it's grown, so I'm letting the cat out of the bag there. But it's evolved and it's been great. And I just wanted to bring you back on and give that update because it's always fun to interview somebody who's starting a business, but then to fast forward a couple of years to just really do a check in and see how you're doing. So that is
Yeah.
what today's episode is all about. So,
Well,
Margaret,
thank you, Lynette.
in
I'm
a
really thrilled to be
nutshell,
here.
over to you. Give us a little background. Who's Margaret? What is she like? What is she into? What is she up to?
Oh, Margaret's just crazy. She's crazy. So Margaret is up to no good. Um,
Okay, I'm like, oh, we're off to a great start. Okay, this is going to be a
right.
juicy one.
So I am continuing to chip away at my business, which I started a few years ago. Like you said, we met kind of early on in COVID, and I started this in 2017, and it has evolved over time. And the principle, the original concept, is to help um, women in midlife. This was the original concept, helping women in midlife and beyond find the perfect place to move. And so I designed this whole system around that. And it was based on me just really flubbing up my own midlife moves, like hardcore, to the point where I got stuck in the middle of a cornfield for 6.5 years. Um, during which time I was just working on, like, okay, like developing this concept and developing the system and working with clients and helping them, and then ultimately helping myself with the system and my husband. And we used it to find our perfect location to now retire, because I am now sort of like finding that I was working with people who were sort of like more than just midlife. They were closer to like retirement age. So I just kind of thought, well, that's often a time when people think about retirement and moving and like what's next. And I thought this seems like a logical um, place to focus on, is that sort of period in life. So that's what I've been doing. And I've been also, I just revamped my website and I added two different programs. So now it's not just helping people find where to move, it's helping them decide if that's in fact the best decision for them. Is this really what you want to do? And you're not going to be like kicking yourself later. And then you go to, okay, I want to move. Where do I go? And I help you figure out which place. And I work with you to figure out, okay, of these top places that you're thinking about, let's talk about what you're going to do when you go there. Where are you going to go? Who are you going to talk to? How are you going to make the most out of it so that you get the best feel for it, so that you can then use that to help you make your decision? And then from that, when people do make their decision, I can help them then through the logistics, both the emotional and sort of the technical logistics of moving, and also the adjustment, because that's a whole other, phase. And I learned that after moving this, fourth time in 10 years. I was like, man, it doesn't even matter if you find your ultimate place. It's still a process to adjust. And so also helping people through that adjustment and sort of getting their roots reestablished.
I know. And everything you said there was just so relatable. Just I when I first met you a few years ago, I wasn't really at that stage of moving yet. I was moving, but it was just sort of during COVID. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go here and we'll see how it works out. But now I'm still here.
Yeah.
I'm going there and I'm still there. And but it's not my end game. I do know that for a fact. And it's kind of like, well, then what is it? And as I've been down here or like here, I've realized community is such a big, important piece of it. And I never even once thought about that. So there's certain things until you've experienced it that you won't know. And that's where I think your value comes in because you're sort of that okay, now you got to be thinking about this, thinking about that. And I bet you $1 million, you probably get told, oh, I never thought that. I never thought of that
Hmm.
every time you meet with a client. It's
Totally.
crazy. It's
It
crazy.
is.
So so let's back up a little bit. First of all, the name of the company is
Your place finder.
perfect name, perfect
Yep.
name.
Says it, doesn't
And
it?
yeah, exactly. So you said something in your introduction that I know where it was, but I do know the pain that you kind of were going through during that time. But you said you ended up in a cornfield for about 10 years. So you kind of did, but you were living in a house. But talk a little
In a
bit about
cornfield.
that. Yeah, in a house, or yeah, in a house in a cornfield. Um, talk a little bit about that. So give the
How did
backstory
I
there.
get there, for example? Like what kind of
Yeah,
a big
yeah.
fat mistake
What
I
happened?
made?
Yeah, what
Yeah,
happened?
yeah.
Yeah,
So, I mean, and this is a good story because hopefully I can, give people a little heads up like, hey, don't make the same dumb mistake. But so I
right.
can sum up and say, okay, first of all, my husband and I were like living in a place neither one of us wanted to live. And that was just, it was consequences, circumstances that, you know, we both ended up in a place that we didn't really want to be. And we met and we were like, let's get out of here. And we just cooked up this stupid fantasy about what it would be like to live in a small town in the Midwest and how it was going to be so awesome. People are going to be so friendly. It was going to be cheap and we were going to have money to spend on stuff we wanted to do because it was going to be so great. Well, so I go out to so we did this whole honeymoon thing and we went through Iowa and for some reason Iowa kept sticking in there. And I was looking at the lists online, which please don't do that. I was looking at those lists and going, oh, look, Iowa, they say just it's so affordable and, healthcare is great and blah,
Top
blah, blah.
10 places to live in the
Please
US.
do not pay attention to those lists. I was looking at that and I was going, well, they think it's a good idea. And so, yeah, I take the old scouting trip, drive out there, and it was just so half-assed. I did not have a plan. I am a planner. I come from a planning background. Did I plan anything? No, I did not plan anything. I just went out there, got out there, was like, okay, well, I'm sort of around the Iowa City area. I don't want to be Iowa City. It's just a little too expensive. We're going to do the small town thing. Let's just look somewhere in the area. And it wasn't based on the place. It wasn't based on anything except where we found a house that was affordable. That was pretty much it. And that is not a good reason to move to a place. I will say that. So, but that's what we did. We were like, I was just like, la di da, bought the house within like a month. We moved down there and then we were just stuck. And then we looked around after about 6 months. You were like, oh, this does not, this is not what we were
Uh-oh.
expecting. And then it was just like, we didn't have the money. We couldn't go back. We didn't have a place to go back to. We only had a place to go forward to. We didn't know where that was, and we didn't have the money to do it. So we were just stuck in Iowa for 6.5 years until we got the
Wow.
resources to get out.
Right, right. So, that is everything you said. We didn't really have a plan. And, when you're telling that story, I just think about how a lot of businesses are born, and it's because you solved the problem for yourself. And now you're going to help other people solve that problem in a much more efficient and faster way. And hopefully to not go through the pains that you went through learning and figuring it all out. So, that's when your idea came to play, was when you were sitting there in the middle of a cornfield for 6.5 years and you thought, oh my God, there's got to be a million other women just like me who aren't really thinking through anything that, I've got this idea and I think this would be great. And for particular reasons, financial or whatever, they end up making this move. So when was the idea born? How did it like sort of come together?
Well, the way it came together was I have been doing grant writing and consulting for like 3 decades, and I had sort of reached the point where I was like, I don't really want to spend the rest of my life doing this. And so I'd signed up for a coaching program and I got certified as a coach. And I went through this whole year-long program. And it was at the end of it, I was like, okay, well, like, what kind of coaching? Like, I don't know. And that was when we landed in Iowa. And it was at the end of the year. It was like 6 months after we'd moved. And I was like, I could help people figure out how to not move to the wrong place. I could coach them into like moving to the right place. And it was like, I don't know. I don't think anybody really does that. But I mean, this sounds like something that's needed because I mean, it's so easy to make the mistake. And once you make that mistake, it's so expensive and it's so hard to, fix.
Reverse,
Um,
like backtrack it, you know?
yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I kind of lost
So
my train of thought.
no, it's okay. What I was going to ask you was, so for a lot of people, I think what they would think as they're listening to you is like, well, I could just use a relocation expert. But when I think about that, I think, well, really, can you actually just do that? Because I think for me, a relocation expert might just be city specific. So you were sort of you taking more of an eagle eye view of, okay, let's before we say, okay, we're going to target into this particular area, let's first like work through a list of questions and requirements. Like walk us through a little bit of the process that you use when you get, sort of a client intake form sort of thing.
Yeah. So actually, my client intake actually consists of like a 90-minute, what I call a spark session. And that
Okay.
is because you get everything going with it. And so what happens is what we really do is we kind of do a deep dive into like, we talk about all the places that they've lived, their experiences living in different places, what they did like, what they didn't like, what their sort of general takeaways were from each of their experiences. And then we'll kind of go through time with that. And then we'll get to the present and then sort of looking to the future. And it's like, okay, where you are now, what are you looking for? What's really important to you? What do you want to make sure? And it's really about getting that priority list so like honed, like you're like, okay, like what's more important, what's more important, what's more important. And then we create what I call an ideal place profile. And that is like, these have the characteristics that you are looking for. This place, whatever fits this criteria, that is your type of location. Like anything that is in that sort of general fits those criteria. And that usually consists of 10 places. I'll come up with a list of 10 places. And then the client can then take a look at all this research that I gather for them. And it's very in depth and it's directly linked. They can all use it themselves and check out all the information. And I give them the time to do that. And then we come back together and and we talk about what they want to look at and how they should go about looking at it. And that's how we go about it. It's really about their preferences, their priorities, what they need, what they want their life to look at now and into the future. Um, and that's what we base the research
Everything
on, is
on.
exactly that.
Exactly. Exactly. Now, have you ever, when somebody said, like for me, I would say to you, well, ocean living would be super important for me, but I don't know, maybe it's not, kind of thing. Like, how do you discern from what they think might be specific requirements? Like, do you try to prioritize that list of stuff, or is it just sort of like a bunch of wish lists and they can narrow it down? Like, do you ever go sort of in the gray zone of, well, it has this place has these requirements, but it's missing four of the other things that you wanted?
Well, that's a really good question because often it's sort of a lesson in compromise because,
Mhm.
you
There you go.
perfect, as we all know, perfect was, it's a relative term. Uh, we try to get
Yeah,
as perfect as possible. But
exactly.
often you'll find that, okay, you have these, let's say 10, generally it's about eight criteria that we actually go from at the end of it. I'll have like eight criteria that I'm searching under. Um, and it might happen that one place might hit all eight of those, maybe. It's really something where the client has to decide, okay, I really want these 8 things, but of those 8 things, if I can get these 5, you know, golden, it's going to be
Yeah,
good.
yeah, exactly.
Um, so yeah, but if like for example, if you were to say, I think I want ocean living, but I'm not sure, perhaps it would be like we might pick some that did have ocean, was oceanside, but then maybe one that wasn't quite on the ocean, but could be close to the ocean, like maybe have the
Right.
benefit of both worlds. So you could choose like, well, I could get to the ocean easily. I wouldn't necessarily be on it. So it was like kind of explore different options.
Yeah, no, that's good. So Margaret, you have put, so you're in the middle of the cornfield, you've started this business, and I guess 6 years later, you put yourself through your own process
Yes.
of of moving. So take us a little bit through that part of the story.
Yeah. So it was, well, it was pretty interesting because I actually went through the process twice. I went through the process pre-COVID, thinking that somehow or other we'd be able to get out of there sooner. And my initial findings took me to Oregon. I mean, really, the reason why we were like Pacific Northwest was really pretty much the focal point all along because my husband was in a tornado and it ripped the roof off his apartment. And so he almost died in it. He could have died. And so really the rule is no place where we could like have any like high risk of tornadoes. I mean, anywhere you go, there's like a potential risk, but it's very
Yeah,
low here. It's a very, very low risk. So that was a driving reason. That was really that. And, I grew up on the West Coast. My family's on the West Coast. They're not right here, but they're close, much closer. And that was also it played into it. So initially I looked at Eugene, Oregon, and that was pre-COVID. And I was thinking, this looks like it could work. And then COVID hit, and then the wildfires, they got really bad wildfires there. And I was like, oh. And then we had a house after COVID, the year after we were like getting ready to fix the house up to move. And then we had a house fire. And so we had to wait another year. And so by the time all this time elapsed and we're still stuck, things changed. And we're like, I don't want to move somewhere where we're going to be in the middle of a wildfire danger. I can't deal with that. We were in a fire. I don't want to think about fire. And so,
right.
yes, there's going to be wildfire danger. I understand that. I'm in an area where there's a lot of trees and you're going to have some danger of that. However, I'm not going to put myself right in the middle of a valley where I'm surrounded by trees that are going to go up in flames and potentially me. So I was like, okay, let's rethink things. And so I was like, okay, we're going to go farther north. We're going to go to Washington State. I like that there's no income tax. That's definitely a big plus. And so I said, okay, Seattle, too expensive probably for us, just a little too steep, and just I'm not quite there with the really big, big city. I mean, I kind of feel like more and more in the medium sort of city range. And so
Sure.
I was like, okay, Tacoma, I'm going to look at Tacoma and Olympia. And they're like 25 miles away from each other. So it's super easy. So I started with Tacoma. I was driving around, I was going places, I was sort of like talking to people and just sort of not getting the vibe, I just wasn't feeling it. And so
So
I thought, okay,
you went there. So you kind of narrowed it down to these two
I
places,
those
and
two
then you
places
thought
these are the two places, and okay,
discovery trip
this is
kind of
it.
thing.
This
Yeah,
is going to
okay.
be the deciding factor.
Okay.
And Tacoma was not it. I could feel it. And as soon as I drove down the road to
Wow.
Olympia and I got into town and I was like, oh, now this is more like it. It was like almost this immediate, like,
Wow.
yes, it's like so, it's a visceral
You
thing. I
just
mean, it
knew.
really is. When you know it, you know it.
Hmm. Wow. Okay. So
So that's what
then
happened.
you, it was sort of like the universe was kind of taking care of a few things for you in terms of the fire that you had. COVID, I think, changed the world, like a lot of people, I think.
Hmm.
Um, but then, yeah, so then you went and you tested it out to see, obviously. I mean, that does make logical sense, and it's probably something you tell your clients to do.
Oh,
Maybe go
yes.
for a 2 week trip
Oh,
and see
absolutely.
and try to get into an Airbnb where you would be within a community and all of that as
Exactly.
well. So, okay, so then so now you've moved and you're in your new place, and what's happening to your program at that point then?
What's happening in my program is I was like, you know what? It's one thing to be able to find the place, but there's so much else involved and that people need help with. And like, I was realizing the things that I was experiencing. I was like, well, I mean, I'm sure other people have similar experiences and probably others too. Um, so I was like, okay, well, I really need to help people. I need to sort of have the full spectrum of services. That's when I recognized that it's so much more than just finding it. It's like you need to make sure, first of all, is this the right decision? Because I think we had been sitting there in Lubbock, Texas at the time, uh, and if I really sat and if I walked through my first program, which is now the pre-program before the place finding program, it's the is this the right decision for you? Is this called ready, set, move? And so it's like, is this
Mhm.
really the right thing? And I go through this whole set of questions. It's like dripped out over 4 weeks. And it gives the client time to think about it, to really think about it. Because honestly, I don't think left to our own devices, we really take the time to think things through and ask ourselves the
Exactly.
questions that really need to be asked. I mean, you know, the questions that maybe you just they don't even come into your head. Like you're like, but like if you have someone else prompt you and you're like, oh, it might force you to think about things that you otherwise would not have thought of. And it might just give you pause or it might make you think, I've thought about it. I've thought of all those things and I know this is what I want to do. So
Yeah.
then you move forward with the finding. And then after you found it, and you're like, okay, now what? It's like moving is a whole other like monster, right? So, okay, well, let's work through these logistics. I'm a planner. Let's talk about the logistics of it, like the figuring out the scheduling and the coordination and all that stuff, but also the emotional stuff. I mean, you're leaving a place. I don't know how long you've lived there. Maybe you lived there a really long time, maybe a short time, but
Yeah.
you're going to have feelings about leaving and going somewhere new, and so working through that stuff, and then when you actually move, then it's like, well, here I am. And like, how do I get like established? And part of that is like figuring out, you put into play all these things that you were talking about. This is what I want my life to look at. And you end up in the place. It's like, okay, well, let's put everything into action. We develop like
Yeah.
a form of plan to like your transition plan. This is your plan to like get your roots established in your new home so you can start feeling like it's home sooner, because it takes time to sort of acclimate to a new place, even if you love it, which I love this place.
Exactly. And I love everything you said there because for me, it's like, well, okay, there's two paths I want to go down. One is the path of just how your program has evolved. So in a general sense, I think a lot of people who start businesses, we come up with this great idea, but we try to formulate this perfect offer before we get it out there. And I think now people are starting to realize, God, the faster I get it out there, the better it is because it's going to morph into something that's different than what you have perfectly outlined into this sort of PowerPoint
Absolutely.
presentation, and then the fact that you've put yourself through the process and recognized, okay, I've got a gap here, I've got gaps here, and that's now it's just really making it feel like a much more wholesome offer. And
Right.
I remember us having many conversations around like, I just can't seem to like figure the rest of this out. And it really is just like kind of let it go, put it out into the universe and find your first or second or third or fourth client, and then
Right.
just keep evolving the offer to that point. And then the other side of it, just like now that the person is in your program or using your services, and everything that you're asking them, like it's just resonating so much because what about the integration? So you get to this city, you're happy with the move, you love your new home, you're there. Now what? Like,
Mhm.
it's not like you can call your friends and invite them over for dinner. Like,
Right.
hopefully you have some neighbors that might bring over an apple pie, but highly unlikely,
Yes.
you know? So like, how it happens in the movies, right? Hi, new neighbor. Not really.
No.
So like, and how do you get into community? And especially as we get older, because I mean, like I'm drawn back to where I was living largely because I miss my community the most. And I think that is what, as we get older, it's even harder, unless I guess now you can kind of find a good pickleball court and do some things like that. But I mean, it's hard to build friendships later in life, let alone in a brand new city where you're feeling this sort of sense of vulnerability. So how do you help them do that? Like what do you kind of force them to do? Here are the 5 things you must do within the first 90 days. Like, do you have that kind of strategy with them?
I mean, I'm very, I go where the client is, I don't like to have like enforced things. I sort of play with what I'm given. Uh, but what I do say is I really feel like it isn't comfortable, but I think it's really important to just put yourself out there. You have to put yourself out there. I I mean, I love people, and so I even just going out and going grocery shopping, it gives me an excuse to just talk to people or try to interact with people.
Right.
Every chance I get, I try to find a person to interact with, if they will, if they're open to it.
Yeah.
Um, Also, things like, you know, if there are things you've always wanted to try, maybe, or new things.
Hmm.
I found like when I moved here, all of a sudden I'm like thinking of all these things I never thought of before that I wanted to try. I'm like, now that I'm here, I'm like, ooh, I should try this, or ooh, I should try that.
Right.
And so it's like that. It's like following up on that. It's not just saying, ooh, I want to try that and just going, ooh. You go, I'm going to try this. I'm going to look it up. I'm going to find a place. I'm going to do this thing. You
Right.
get into networking. I'm going to this networking group. It's a civic group called Zonta, and they work with women's rights stuff, and it's an international organization. I'm like, I'm going to network there. I'm going to talk to other women, and I'm going to try to, make some friends and network for my business. And, so it's just important to, even if you're not comfortable, to just push yourself and make yourself get out there and meet people and try new things. And that I think is key.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. Margaret, I have a question. So, when do you know it's time to just move on? Like, let's say you make this move and you did all the right things. You hired Margaret. Like, I hired Margaret. I got Margaret to do all these things for me. I went and I did a test run for 2 or 3 weeks. I get there and like, how long does it take? Like, how long what do I need to give it if it's just not feeling right?
So are you talking about the new place you're moving to, or?
Yeah.
I mean, I think often people don't give it enough time because there is that transition period, and you need to allow that time to try. And if you don't try and you just kind of decide, then you really need to check yourself. I mean, because if you really need to put yourself out there and make sure that it's not the right place, because it's easy to just kind of make that decision because you're not feeling comfortable. I feel like you really have to be sure it's not the right place. But once you establish that, I mean, you got to kind of respect that it's not right for you. I mean, if it doesn't feel right after you've really given it your college try, you've given it the time and you've given it the effort and it's still not working, I would say 2 years at least. I would give it at least.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. That to me, that makes sense because the first 6 months is kind of, you're just kind of getting through the administrative things like the doctors and the dentists and all those things. It's like
It
starting
took
a
me
new
6 months
jobs.
to come down off the ledge. So, I mean, no, I was nowhere near that even after 6 months.
What do you mean to off the ledge?
Well, because of 6.5 years of being miserable in a place
Oh,
and
yeah.
feeling kind of isolated and ostracized by the people there, it's just a really rough place to be, emotionally, mentally. Um,
Hmm.
and I think moving here and being in a place that is, it's just so much more in line with what I need, what we need, um, that it just took some kind of like recovery period, because it
Yeah.
really put us through the ringer. It was really a mind fuck, you know.
Yeah. 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 So, Margaret, who is your ideal client? And let me back up because in my program, that, it's from idea to first client. And so we have to get really clear on who are we serving. Yes, you can cast your net and probably pick up a few of those outliers, but ultimately, who is it that you want to solve that problem for? So give us a little bit about who your ideal customer is.
My ideal customer is an individual or a couple, um, who are almost retired or retired. And retirement, again, I use that term loosely because I mean, I think the whole definition of retirement is changing, and a lot of people aren't retiring. But let's just talk about retirement age, kind of getting into the
Yeah.
retirement age. And a lot of my clients have been, in their 60s and 70s,
Hmm.
even into the, yeah. So people are thinking about moving, you know, into their 70s. And I like working with people who are older like that because I'm really interested in hearing about their lives, because we go through this whole discovery process and I get to learn all about them, and they've had these rich lives. And then it's like, well, what do you want now? And it's a customer base that I'm really interested in and I really enjoy working with. And so that's why I would say that is my target audience, just people who are a little longer in the tooth than others.
So what sort of territory do you cover for your moving services, your
So
package, your relocation
I
packages?
cover all around the world, with the caveat that a person can't just come to me and say, I want to move somewhere in the world. I just somewhere in the world. So at least
Right.
you got to give me like just some general idea of like areas. And as long as we have an area to work within, or a couple of different areas, whatever you want, we're good. I need to have some sort of narrowing in of the lens. Otherwise, I mean, that's just too wide of a net to cast. So,
Right.
but yes, I do all over the world. Started out just US and Canada, but did
Yeah.
expand over time.
Yes, I do. I know that. Actually, I was just going to mention that because when we first met a couple of years ago, you were just really looking kind of North America kind of and really focusing on the US. So that's lovely to hear. The other question I have for you is just the tenacity and the grit, I guess, that you have been able to maintain over the past, since 2017 when this idea was first born. And, we all know that, nothing is a straight line. And starting a business, and especially a business that when you went out and did your research, there wasn't a lot of people offering it. I mean, I think your competitor might have been like a relocation expert, but for that particular city, exactly. So what is keeping you motivated? What keeps you going day in, day out on building this business and really trying to make it grow?
That would have to be. I, I love helping people. I feel like it's why I'm here. I'm here to help people, and I really, really feel strongly about this. That I mean, I know there's a ton of people out there who screw up their moves and they kick themselves and they're like, what did I do? How did I do this? And I just, that's what keeps me going, is knowing that there's people out there still doing it. And if I can just get enough people to know about me and know what I'm doing, I can really help
Yeah,
people. I can save them hundreds of thousands of dollars possibly.
right.
You move someplace, you drop a load of money on a house or whatever, and it's like, you know, I can
And
help
just the
you
expense of
avoid that.
moving. Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it's expense. Every time you move, there's an expense associated to it, even if it's just even down the street.
And it's
So
here
yeah,
and it's
no,
here and it's in your pocketbook. It's everywhere. There's an expense.
yeah, exactly, exactly. Okay, Margaret, where can people find you?
They can find me on my website at
Okay,
yourplacefinder.com and just any of the
easy
social
to remember.
medias that Your Place Finder is my tag.
Okay, well, I'm definitely, I know I follow you on social, Instagram, Your Place Finder, and yourplacefinder.com. I have taken a peek at the new website. It's great. It's lovely. It's worth just even going to take a look at it if you're thinking about making a move in the near future. So, Margaret, it was wonderful to catch up. We have stayed in touch, but it was just good to catch up and really get a deeper dive into how your business is growing. And congratulations. Well done, girl.
Thank you, Lynette.
Super
So
proud
great
of
to be
you.
with you again. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Well, we'll talk to you soon.
All right.